Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue with our reading of The Desert of Wheat by Zane Gray. We are in Chapter 6. If she had been a man, though, that labor, hard as it was, would have appealed to her. Harvesting the grain was beautiful, whether in the old slow method of threshing or with one of these modern man-saving machines. She jumped off, and the big, ponderous thing, almost gifted with intelligence, it seemed to Lenore, rolled on with its whirring roar, drawing its cloud of dust and leaving behind a litter of straw. It developed then that Adams had walked along with the machine, and he now addressed her. "Will you be staying here till your father comes?" he asked. "No, Mr. Adams. Why do you ask?" "You oughtn't come out here alone or go back alone. All these strange men, some of them hard customers. You'll excuse me, miss, but this harvest is not like other harvests." "I'll wait for my father, and I'll not go out of sight," replied Lenore. Thanking the foreman for his thoughtfulness, she walked away, and soon she stood at the edge of the first wheat field. The grain was not yet ripe, but near at hand it was a pale gold. The wind out of the west waved and swept the wheat, while the almost imperceptible shadows followed. A road half overgrown with grass and goldenrod bordered the wheat field, and it wound away down toward the house. Her father appeared, mounted on the white horse he always rode. Lenore sat down in the grass to wait for him. Nodding stalks of goldenrod leaned to her face. When looked at closely, how truly gold their color. Yet it was not such a gold as that of the rich blaze of ripe wheat. She was admitting to her consciousness a jealousy of anything comparable to wheat, and suddenly she confessed that her natural love for it had been augmented by a subtle growing sentiment. Not sentiment about the war or the need of the Allies or the meaning of the staff of life. She had sensed young Dorn's passion for wheat, and it had made a difference to her. "No use lying to myself," she soliloquized. "I think of him. I can't help it. I ran out here, wild, restless, unable to reason, just because I decided to see him again, to make sure I really didn't care. How furious, how ridiculous I'll feel when... Lenore did not complete her thought, because she was not sure. Nothing could be any truer than the fact that she had no idea how she would feel. She began sensitively to distrust herself. She, who had always been so sure of motives, so contented with things as they were, had been struck by an absurd fancy that haunted, because it was fiercely repudiated and scorned, that would give her no rest until it was proven false. But suppose it were true? A succeeding blankness of mind awoke to the clip-clop of hoofs and her father's cheery hello. Anderson dismounted, and throwing his bridle, he sat down heavily beside her. "You can ride back home," he said. Lenore knew she had been reproved for wandering out there, and she made a motion to rise. His big hand held her down. "No hurry now that I'm here. Grand day, ain't it? And I see the barley's going. Them sacks looks good to me." Lenore waited with some perturbation. She had a guilty conscience, and she feared he meant to quiz her about her sudden change of front regarding the entry. So she could not look up, and she could not say a word. "Jake says that Nash has been trying to make up to you. Any sense in what he says?" asked her father bluntly. "Why, hardly. Oh, I've noticed Nash is rather fresh, as Rose calls it," replied Lenore, somewhat relieved at this unexpected query. Yes, he's been making eyes at Rose, she told me, replied Anderson.
Discharge him, said Lenore forcibly.
Yeah, so I ought. But let me tell you, Lenore, I've been hoping to get Nash dead to rights.
What more do you want? She demanded.
I mean, regarding his relation to the IWW. Listen, here's the point. Nash has been tracked and caught in secret talks with prominent men in this country, men of foreign blood and maybe foreign sympathies. We're at the start of a big and bad times in the good old U.S. No one could tell how bad. Well, you know my position in Golden Valley. I'm looked to. Reckon this IWW has got me a marked man. I'm packing 2 guns right now, and you bet Jake is packing the same. We don't travel far apart anymore this summer.
Lenore had started shudderingly, and her look showed her voiceless fear.
Now, you needn't tell your mother, he went on more intimately. I can trust you, and to come back to Nash. He and this Glidden, you remember, one of those men at Dorn's house, they're using gold. They must have barrels of it. If I could find out where that gold comes from. Probably they don't know, but I might find out if men here in our own country are hatching plots with the IWW.
Plots? What for? Queried Lenore breathlessly.
To destroy my wheat, to drive off or bribe the harvest hands, to cripple the crop yield in the Northwest, to draw the militia here, in short, to harass and weaken and slow down our government in its preparation against Germany.
Why, that is terrible, declared Lenore.
I've a hunch from Jake. There's a whisper of a plot to put me out of the way, said Anderson darkly.
Oh, good heavens, you don't mean it, cried Lenore distractedly.
Sure I do. But that's no way for Anderson's daughter to take it. Our women have got to fight too. We've all got to meet these German-hired devils with their own weapons. Now, lass, you know you'll get these wheatlands of mine someday. It's in my will. That's because you, like your dad, always loved the wheat. You'd fight, wouldn't you, to save your grain for our soldiers, bread for your own brother Jim, and for your own land?
Fight? Would I? Burst out Lenore with a passionate little cry.
Good, now you're talking, exclaimed her father.
I'll find out about this Nash if you'll let me, declared Lenore as if inspired.
How? What do you mean, girl?
I'll encourage him. I'll make him think I'm a wishy-washy moonstruck girl smitten with him. All's fair in war. And if he means ill by my father, Anderson muttered low under his breath, and his big hand snapped hard at the nodding goldenrod. For my sake, to help me, you'd encourage Nash, flirt with him a little, find out all you could?
Yes, I would, she cried deliberately. But she wanted to cover her face with her hands. She trembled slightly, then grew cold, with a sickening disgust at this strange, new, uprising self.
Wait a minute before you say too much, went on Anderson. You're my best beloved child, my Lenore, the lass I've been so proud of all my life. I'd spill blood to avenge an insult to you. But Lenore, we've entered upon a terrible war. People out here, especially the women, don't realize it yet. But you must realize it. When I said goodbye to Jim, my son, I felt I'd never look upon his face again. I gave him up. I could have held him back, got exemption for him, but no, by God, I gave him up to make safety and happiness and prosperity for, say, your children and Rose's and Kathleen's. I'm working now for the future. So must every loyal man and every loyal woman. We love our own country. And I ask you to see, as I see, the terrible danger to that country. Think of you and Rose and Kathleen being treated like those poor Belgian girls. Well, you'd get that and worse if the Germans won this war. And the point is, for us to win, every last one of us must fight, sacrifice to that end, and hang together. Anderson paused huskily and swallowed hard while he looked away across the fields.
Lenore felt herself drawn by an irresistible power. The west wind rustled through the waving wheat. She heard the whir of the threshers. It all seemed unreal. Her father's passion had made this place another world. So much for that, resumed Anderson. I'm going to do my best. And I may make blunders. I'll play the game as it's dealt out to me. Lord knows I feel all in the dark. But it's the nature of the effort and the spirit that'll count. I'm going to save most of the wheat on my ranches. And being a Westerner who can see ahead, I know there's going to be blood spilled. I'd give a lot to know who sent this Nash spying on me. I'm satisfied now he's an agent, a spy, a plotter for a gang that's marked me. I can't prove it yet, but I feel it. Maybe nothing worthwhile, worth the trouble, will ever be found out from him. But I don't figure that way. I say play their own game and take a chance. If you encourage Nash, you'd probably find out all about him. The worst of it is, could you be slick enough? Could a girl as fine and square and high-spirited as you ever double-cross a man, even a scoundrel like Nash? I reckon you could, considering the motive. Women are wonderful. Well, if you can fool him, make him think he's a winner, flatter him till he swells up like a toad, promise to elope with him, be curious, jealous, make him tell where he goes, whom he meets, show his letters, all without ever suffering his hand on you, I'll give my consent. I think more of you for it. Now the question is, can you do it? Yes, whispered Lenore. Good, exploded Anderson, in a great relief. Then he began to mop his wet face. He arose, showing the weight of heavy guns in his pockets, and he gazed across the wheat fields. Yeah, that wheat'll be ripe in a week. It sure looks fine. Lenore, you ride back home now. Don't let Jake pump you. He's powerful curious. And I'll go give these IWWs a first dose of Anderson. He turned away without looking at her, and he hesitated, bending over to pluck a stem of goldenrod. Lass, you're like your mother, he said unsteadily, and she helped me win out during my struggle here. You're brave and you're big. Lenore wanted to say something to show her feeling, to make her task seem lighter, but she could not speak. We're pards now, with no secrets, he continued, with a different note in his voice. And I want you to know that it ain't likely Nash or Glidden will get out of this country alive. Chapter 7. 3 days later, Lenore accompanied her father on the ride to the Bend country. She sat in the back seat of the car with Jake, an arrangement very gratifying to the cowboy, but received with ill-concealed displeasure by the driver Nash. They had arranged to start at sunrise, and it became manifest that Nash had expected Lenore to sit beside him all during the long ride. It was her father, however, who took the front seat, and behind Nash's back he had slyly winked at Lenore, as if to compliment her on the evident success of their deep plot. Lenore, at the first opportunity that presented, shot Nash a warning glance, which was sincere enough. Jake had begun to use keen eyes, and there was no telling what he might do. The morning was cool, sweet, fresh, with a red sun presaging a hot day. The big car hummed like a droning bee and seemed to cover the miles as if by magic. Lenore sat with face uncovered, enjoying the breeze and the endless colorful scene flashing by, listening to Jake's amusing comments and trying to keep back thought of what discovery might await her before the end of this day. Once across the Copper River, they struck the gradual ascent, and here the temperature began to mount and the dust to fly. Lenore drew her veils close, and leaning comfortably back, she resigned herself to wait and to endure. By the flight of a crow, it was about 100 miles from Anderson's ranch to Palmer, but by the roundabout roads necessary to take the distance was a great deal longer. Lenore was well aware when they got up on the desert, and the time came when she thought she would suffocate. There appeared to be intolerable hours in which no one spoke, and only the hum and creak of the machine throbbed in her ears. She could not see through her veils and did not part them until a stop was made at Palmer. Her father got out, sputtering and gasping, shaking the dust in clouds from his long linen coat. Jake, who always said he lived on dust and heat, averred it was not exactly a regular fine day. Lenore looked out, trying to get a breath of air. Nash busied himself with the hot engine. The little country town appeared dead and buried under dust. There was not a person in sight, nor a sound to be heard. The sky resembled molten lead, with a blazing center too bright for the gaze of man. Anderson and Jake went into the little hotel to get some refreshments. Lenore preferred to stay in the car, saying she wanted only a cool drink. The moment the two men were out of sight, Nash straightened up his gaze darkly and hungrily at Lenore. "This is as good a chance as we'll get," he said in an eager, hurried whisper. "For what?" asked Lenore, aghast. "To run off," he replied huskily. Lenore had proceeded so cleverly to carry out her scheme that in 3 days Nash had begun to implore and demand that she elope with him. He had been so much of a fool, but she, as yet, had found out but little about him. His right name was Rankin. He was a socialist. He had plenty of money and hinted at mysterious sources for more. At this, Lenore hid her face, and while she fell back in pretended distress, she really wanted to laugh. She had learned something new in these few days, and that was to hate. "Oh, no, she murmured. I can't think of that yet." "But why not?" he demanded in shrill violence. His gloved hand clenched on the tool he held. Mother has been so unhappy with my brother Jim off to the war. I just couldn't now. Harry, you must give me time. It's all so sudden. Please wait." Nash appeared divided between two emotions. Lenore watched him from behind her parted veil. She had been astonished to find out that side by side with her intense disgust and shame at the part she was playing, there was a strong, keen, passionate interest in it, owing to the fact that though she could prove little against this man, her woman's intuition had sensed his secret, deadly antagonism toward her father. By little significant mannerisms and revelations, he had more and more betrayed the German in him. She saw it in his overbearing conceit, his almost instant assumption that he was her master. At first, Lenore feared him, but as she learned to hate him, she lost her fear. She had never been alone with him except under such circumstances as this, and she had decided that she would not be. "Wait," he was expostulating. "But it's going to get hot for me." "Oh, what do you mean?" she begged. "You frighten me." "Lenore, the IWW will have hard sledding in this wheat country. I belong to that, I told you. But the union is run differently this summer, and I've got work to do. And I don't like, since I fell in love with you. Come, run off with me and I'll give it up." Lenore trembled at this admission. She appeared to be close upon further discovery. "Harry, how wildly you talk," she exclaimed. "I hardly know you. You frighten me with your mysterious talk. Have a little consideration for me." Nash strode back to lean into the car. Behind his huge goggles, his eyes gleamed. His gloved hand closed hard on her arm. "It is sudden. It's got to be sudden," he said in fierce undertone. "You must trust me." I will, but you must confide in me," she replied earnestly. "I'm not quite a fool. You're rushing me to... Suddenly he released her, threw up his hand, then quickly stepped back to the front of the car. Jake stood in the door of the hotel. He had seen that action of Nash's. Then Anderson appeared, followed by a boy carrying a glass of water for Lenore. They approached the car, Jake sauntering at last with his curious gaze on Nash.
Go in and get a bite and a drink, said Anderson to the driver, and hurry. Nash obeyed. Jake's eyes never left him until he entered the door. Then Jake stepped in beside Lenore. That water's wet anyhow, he drawled. We'll get a good cold drink at Dorn's, said Anderson. Lass, how are you making it? Fine, she replied, smiling. So I seen, significantly added Jake, with a piercing glance at her. Lenore realized then that she would have to confide in Jake or run the risk of having violence done to Nash. So she nodded wisely at the cowboy and winked mischievously, and taking advantage of Anderson's entering the car, she whispered in Jake's ear, I'm finding out things. Tell you later. The cowboy looked anything but convinced, and he glanced with narrowed eyes at Nash as that worthy hurried back to the car. With a lurch and a leap, the car left Palmer behind in a cloud of dust. The air was furnace hot, oppressive, and exceeding dry. Lenore's lips smarted so that she continually moistened them. On all sides stretched dreary parched wheat fields. Anderson shook his head sadly. Jake said, Ain't that too bad? Not half growed, and sure too late now. Near at hand, Lenore saw the short, immature, dirty, whitish wheat, and she realized that it was ruined. It's been getting worse, Jake, remarked Anderson. Most of this won't be cut at all, and what is cut won't yield seedlings. I see a yellow patch here and there on the north slopes, but on the most part, the bend's a failure. Father, you remember Dorn's section that promised so well? Asked Lenore. Yeah, but it promised only in case of rain. I'd look for the worst, replied Anderson regretfully. It looks like storm clouds over there, said Lenore, pointing far ahead. Through the drifting veils of heat, far across the bare, dreamy hills of fallow and the blasted fields of wheat, stood up some huge white columnar clouds, a vivid contrast to the coppery sky. By George, there's a thunderhead, exclaimed Anderson. Jake, what do you make of that? Looks good to me, replied Jake, who was always hopeful. Lenore bore the hot wind and the fine, choking dust without covering her face. She wanted to see all the hills and valleys of this desert of wheat. Her heart beat a little faster as, looking across that waste of heroic labor, she realized she was nearing the end of a ride that might be momentous for her. The very aspect of that wide, treeless expanse, with all its overwhelming mating, seemed to make her a stronger and more thoughtful girl. If those endless wheat fields were indeed ruined, what a pity, what a tragedy. Not only would young Dorn be ruined, but perhaps many other toiling farmers. Somehow Lenore felt no hopeless certainty of ruin for the young man in whom she was interested. There on that slope, spoke up Anderson, pointing to a field which was yellow in contrast to the surrounding gray field. There's a half section of fair wheat. But such tinges of harvest gold were not many in half a dozen miles of dreary hills. Where were the beautiful shadows in the wheat? Wondered Lenore. Not a breath of wind appeared to stir across those fields. As the car neared the top of a hill, the road curved into another, and Lenore saw a dusty flash of another car passing on ahead. Suddenly Jake leaned forward. Boss, I seen something thrown out of that car into the wheat, he said. What? Maybe it was a bottle, replied Anderson, peering ahead. Nope, sure wasn't that. There, I seen it again. Watch, boss. Lenore strained her eyes and felt a stir of her pulses. Jake's voice was perturbing. Was it strange that Nash slowed up a little where there was no apparent need? Then Lenore saw a hand flash out of the side of the car ahead and throw a small, glinting object into the wheat. There, seen it again, said Jake. I saw. Jake, mark that spot. Nash, slow down, yelled Anderson. Lenore gathered from the look of her father and the cowboy that something was amiss, but she could not guess what it might be. Nash bent sullenly at his task of driving. I reckon about here, said Jake, waving his hand. Stop her, ordered Anderson, and as the car came to a halt, he got out, followed by Jake. Wow, I marked it by that rock, declared the cowboy. So did I, responded Anderson. Let's get over the fence and find what it was that they threw in there. Jake rested a lean hand on a post and vaulted the fence. But Anderson had to climb laboriously and painfully over the barbed wire obstruction. Lenore marveled at his silence and his persistence. Anderson hated wire fences. Presently he got over, and then he divided his time between searching in the wheat and peering after the strange car that was drawing far away. Lenore saw Jake pick up something and scrutinize it. I'll be doggoned, he muttered. Then he approached Anderson. What is that? Jake, you can lambaste me if I ever saw the likes, replied Anderson, but it looks bad. Let's rustle after that car. As Anderson clambered into his seat once more, he looked dark and grim. Catch that car ahead, he tersely ordered Nash, whereupon the driver began to go through his usual motions in starting. Lenore, what do you make of this? Queried Anderson, turning to show her a small cake of some gray substance, soft and wet to the touch. I don't know what it is, replied Lenore wonderingly. Do you? No, and I'd give a lot. Say, Nash, hurry, over all that car. Anderson turned to see why his order had not been obeyed. He looked angry. Nash made hurried motions. The car trembled, the machinery began to whir. Then came a tremendous buzzing roar, a violent shaking of the car, followed by sharp explosion and silence. You stripped the gears, shouted Anderson, with the red fading out of his face. No, but something's wrong, replied Nash. He got out to examine the engine. Anderson manifestly controlled strong feeling. Lenore saw Jake's hand go to her father's shoulder. Boss, he whispered, we can't catch that car now. Anderson resigned himself, averted his face so that he could not see Nash, who had deliberately stalled the engine or disordered something so as to permit the escape of the strange car ahead. She saw it turn off the long, straight road ahead and disappear to the right. After some minutes' delay, Nash resumed his seat and started the car once more. From the top of the next hill, Lenore saw the Dorn farm and home. All the wheat looked parched. She remembered, however, that the section of promising grain lay on the north slope and therefore out of sight from where she was. Looks as bad as any, said Anderson. Goodbye to my money. Lenore shut her eyes and thought of herself, her inward state. She seemed calm and glad to have that first part of the journey almost ended. Her motive in coming was not now the impelling thing that had actuated her. When next the car slowed down, she heard her father say, "Drive in by the house." Then Lenore, opening her eyes, saw the gate, the trim little orchard with its scant shade, the gray old weather-beaten house which she remembered so well. The big porch looked inviting, as it was shady and held by an old rocking chair and a bench with blue cushions. A door stood wide open. No one appeared to be on the premises. "Nash, blow your horn, and then hunt around for somebody," said Anderson. "Come, get out, Lenore, you must be half dead." "Oh no, only half dust and half fire," replied Lenore, laughing, as she stepped out. What a relief to get rid of the coat, veils, bonnet, and to sit on a shady porch where a faint breeze blew. Just at that instant she heard a low, distant rumbling. Thunder! It thrilled her. Jake brought her a cold, refreshing drink, and she sent him back after another. She wet her handkerchief and bathed her hot face. It was indeed very comfortable there after that long, hot ride. "Miss Lenore, I seen that Nash pawing you," said the cowboy, "and by gosh, I couldn't believe my eyes." "Not so loud, Jake. The young gentleman imagines that I'm in love with him," replied Lenore. Well, I'll remove his imagining, declared Jake coolly.
Jake, you will do nothing.
Uh-huh. Then you are in love with him.
Lenore was compelled to explain to this loyal cowboy just what the situation meant.
Whereupon Jake swore his amaze and said, I'm going to lick him anyhow for that. And he caught up the tin can cup and shuffled away.
Footsteps and voices sounded on the path, upon which presently appeared Anderson and young Dorn. Father's gone to Wheatley, he was saying, but I'll be glad to tell you we'll pay $20,000 on the debt as soon as we harvest. If it rains, we'll pay it all and have $30,000 left.
Good, I hope it rains. And that thunder sounds hopeful, responded Anderson.
It's been hopeful like that for several days, but no rain, said Dorn. And then, espying Lenore, he seemed startled out of his eagerness. He flushed slightly. I didn't see that you had brought your daughter. He greeted her somewhat bashfully, and Lenore returned the greeting calmly, watching him steadily and waiting for the nameless sensations she had imagined would attend this meeting. But whatever these might be, they did not come to overwhelm her. The gladness of his voice, as he had spoken so eagerly to her father about the debt, had made her feel very kindly toward him. It might have been natural for a young man to resent this dragging debt, but he was fine. She observed as he sat down that once the smile and flush left his face, he seemed somewhat thinner and older than she had pictured him. A shadow lay in his eyes, and his lips were sad. He had evidently been working upon their arrival. He wore overalls, dusty and ragged. His arms, bare to the elbow, were brown and muscular. His thin cotton shirt was wet with sweat, and it clung to his powerful shoulders. Anderson surveyed the young man with friendly glance. What's your first name? He queried with his blunt frankness. Kurt, was the reply. Is that American? No, neither is Dorn. But Kurt Dorn is an American. Huh, so I see, and I'm powerful glad. And you've saved the big section of Promising Wheat? Yes, we've been lucky. It's the best and finest wheat Father ever raised. If it rains, the yield will go 60 bushels to the acre. 60? Phew! Ejaculated Anderson. Lenore smiled at these wheat men and said, It surely will rain, and likely storm today. I am a prophet who never fails. By George, that's true. Lenore has anybody beat when it comes to figuring the weather, declared Anderson. Dorn looked at her without speaking, but his smile seemed to say what she could not help being a prophet of good, of hope, of joy. Say, Lenore, how many bushels in a section at 60 per acre? Went on Anderson. 38,400, replied Lenore. And what do you sell it for? Asked Anderson of Dorn. Father has sold at $2.25 a bushel, replied Dorn. Good, but he ought to have waited. The government will set a higher price. How much will that come to, Lenore? Dorn smiled as he watched Lenore do her mental arithmetic, attested to the fact that he already had figured out the sum. $86,400, replied Lenore. Is that right? And you'll have $30,000 left after all debts are paid? Inquired Anderson. Yes, sir. I can hardly realize it. That's a fortune for one section of wheat. But we've had 4 bad seasons. Oh, if it only rains today. Lenore turned her cheek to the faint west wind, and then she looked long at the sky, slowly spreading clouds, white and beautiful, high up near the skyline and dark and forbidding down along the horizon. I knew a girl who could feel things move when no one else could, said Lenore. I'm sensitive like that, at least about wind and rain. Right now, I can feel rain in the air. Then you have brought me luck, said Dorn earnestly. Indeed, I guess my luck has turned. I hated the idea of going away with that debt unpaid. Are you going away? Asked Lenore in surprise. Yes, rather, he replied with a short, sardonic laugh. He fumbled in a pocket of his overalls and drew forth a paper which he opened. A flame burned the fairness from his face. His eyes darkened and shone with peculiar intensity of pride. I was a first man drafted in this pen country. My number was the first called. Drafted, echoed Lenore, and she seemed to be standing on the threshold of an amazing and terrible truth. Lass, we forget, said her father rather thickly. Oh, but why? Cried Lenore. She had voiced the same poignant appeal to her brother Jim. Why need he? Why must he go to the war? What for? And Jim had called out a bitter curse on the Germans he meant to kill. Why? Returned Dorn, with the sad, thoughtful shadow returning to his eyes. How many times have I asked myself that? In one way, I don't know. I haven't told Father yet. It's not for his sake, but when I think deeply, when I can feel and see, I mean I'm going for my country, for you and your sisters. Like a soldier, then Lenore received her mortal blow, facing him who dealt it, and it was a sudden, overwhelming realization of love. No confusion, no embarrassment, no shame attended the agony